Yeah, that's not right. So if I speak like this, can you hear me, everybody in the back? Yes. Okay, cool. Very good. So a comparative analysis of the non-dual Kashmir Shaivism and Krause's panentheism reveals astonishing similarities between these two systems of philosophy. After examining these convergences, we turn to what appear to be crucial differences between the two systems.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start by talking a little bit about the metaphysics of non-dual Shaivism. So the Pratyabhijna system, and that's one of the schools of non-dual Shaivism, articulates a monistic and panentheistic philosophy centered on recognition, so Pratyabhijna, of one's true nature as none other than Shiva, the absolute and all-encompassing divine reality. This recognition is not acquiring something new, but realizing an eternal identity. The individual self has always been Shiva. However, due to ignorance, this truth has been forgotten. So liberation in this system is thus the direct knowledge of one's inherent divinity, which alone is the necessary and sufficient to break free from the cycle of suffering and transmigration. And just because we don't have a lot of time, so I'm cutting some stuff, but basically we have four major players in this system. So we have Somananda, Utpaladeva, Abhinavagupta, and Shimaraja. And it's important to point out that they don't hold identical positions, but I think that will become clear later on. So in the Pratyabhijna school, Shiva is the singular, infinite, all-encompassing, autonomous consciousness, the substratum of all reality and the source of all phenomena. Pratyabhijna advances a form of philosophical idealism, affirming that Shiva is the sole reality and nothing exists outside this singular consciousness. Somananda, regarded as the school's founder, initially articulated a panentheistic framework where Shiva is fully identified with the universe. As Nimek observes, Shiva is never passive, transcendent, and an inaccessible deity, but rather is ever fully engaged in manifesting all the appearances and activities that constitutes the very existence of the universe. Yes, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. Now, please. Yeah. Sorry about that. Some technical issues here. However, Utpaladeva and Abhinavagupta refined this vision into a panentheistic framework, positing that the universe is a manifestation or appearance, so the Sanskrit word here is abhasha, of Shiva, yet neither ontologically identical nor reducible to him. So Shiva pervades all creations while simultaneously transcending it, establishing his nature as both immanent and transcendent. So this relationship between the absolute and the world forms the foundation of Pratyabhijna's panentheism, wherein creation unfolds as the free manifestations of Shiva's will, giving rise to all multiplicity without compromising his inherent unity and absolute freedom. Despite this cosmic play, Shiva remains utterly free and unaffected by his own manifestation. So central to the Pratyabhijna metaphysics is that Shiva is an autonomous, so the word here is svatantra, self-aware consciousness characterized by two inseparable aspects. So prakasha, which is light or luminosity, and vimarsha. And this is a very technical term, very important term of the system. It's usually translated as reflective awareness. Prakasha denotes the illuminating aspect, so the pure light of consciousness that reveals all phenomena while remaining their unchanging ground. Vimarsha is the reflexive awareness that enables Shiva to be self-aware. As Utpaladeva states, the essential nature of light is reflective awareness, otherwise light, though colored by objects, would be similar to an insentient reality, such as a crystal and so on. Without Vimarsha, consciousness would passively reflect objects like an inert crystal, where Vimarsha ensures that Shiva's light illuminates while remaining aware of itself as that source. This capacity for self-awarenesses distinguishes sentient consciousness from insentient matter, a concept Pratyabhijna develops in response to the Buddhist logico-epistemological accounts of self-awareness, so svasamvedana, while reinterpreting it with a Shaiva ontological framework. The Pratyabhijna tradition employs the metaphor of a mirror to illustrate Shiva's relationship to his manifestations. So Abhinavagupta's Paramartasara likens the world's appearance within consciousness to images reflected in a mirror, distinct in form yet ultimately inseparable from it. The world appears differentiated both internally and in relation to consciousness, but remains in truth non-different from consciousness. The world is thus not external to Shiva, but a reflection within his consciousness. Because this reflection is contained with the absolute, Pratyabhijna thinkers, as has been already pointed out, regards the world as fully real. Moreover, the mirror analogy highlights the tradition's panentheism. So just as a mirror reflects images without changing its essential nature, Shiva manifests the universe within himself while remaining unaltered. Thus, his transcendent nature and oneness remains intact. Shiva manifests the universe through his power, or Shakti, which is synonymous with Vimarsha. This creative power is neither external nor necessitated, but a free, spontaneous play, so krida is the word here, within consciousness. The doctrine of Svatantriyavada, or absolute freedom, asserts that Shiva's will alone is sufficient to generate the whole cosmos. As Utpaladeva states, indeed, the conscious being, God, like the yogin, independently of material causes, in virtue of his volition alone, renders externally manifest the multitude of objects that reside within him. Creation is thus not an act of compulsion or fragmentation, but an autonomous, joyous self-expression of Shiva. As the sole cause of manifestation, he requires no external medium. The universe emerges spontaneously from his sovereign will. Unlike a sequential process of cause and effect, creation is direct, unmediated self-revelation. Through manifesting as the universe, Shiva remains transcendent, beyond limitation, and eternally free. His non-dual nature is untouched by creation. Creation in Pratyabhijna follows a top-down model where absolute consciousness contracts from pure subjectivity into empirical multiplicity through the successive manifestations of 36 tattvas, or ontological categories. At the highest level, Shiva exists as an undifferentiated self-luminous consciousness. Through Shakti, this consciousness progressively assumes differentiated forms, culminating in the material universe. A key moment in this process is the emergence of Maya, the principle of limitation that introduces differentiation. Unlike Advaita Vedanta, which treats Maya as an illusory appearance, or vivarta, Pratyabhijna understands it as Shiva's power. His freedom is to assume finite forms in a play of self-concealment. As Rathier explains, Maya is not a deceptive appearance distinct from reality, but an aspect of consciousness itself, enabling the manifestation of variety. Through Maya, Shiva veils his infinite nature, giving rise to the illusion of separation and the experience of bondage. This apparent limitation is not an ontological fall, but a cognitive contraction, a temporary obscuration of self-recognition. Liberation is the dissolution of this ignorance, the realization that subject and object, self and world are expressions of the same consciousness. As Abhinavagupta describes, Shiva's self-concealment is an act of absolute freedom, a cosmic game in which he appears fragmented while remaining fully aware of his unity. So this is a quote from the Vimarshini. Because this highest Lord, that is consciousness, accomplishes the most difficult deeds due to its pure freedom, it is skillful in the game of self-concealment. Concealing oneself, whereas one's nature remains unveiled, this is precisely the omnipresent Lord's Maya, from which comes all this variety found in the universe. Even bondage, then, is nothing but a free play of consciousness. How are we for time? Okay, I think I'll stop there. Just to... Yeah, thank you.
This one? Okay, so Karl Christian Friedrich Krause, a German idealist, left posterity an impressive and astonishingly contemporary work of philosophical creativity, which not only covers numerous topics of theoretical and practical philosophy, but can also be seen in the history of philosophy as one of the first works from a European pen, which, in the sense of intercultural or cross-cultural philosophy, recognizes the systematic significance of the Indian roots of European thought and combines them with Platonic metaphysics and Kant's transcendental philosophy to form a system of philosophy. So Krause was confident. Oh, that's really challenging. So Krause was confident that, quote, panentheism will be the one and only accepted, indeed, the only valid system of science, since it provides the unfolding of the structure of the one pure, complete, and whole truth, end of quote. On Krause's panentheism, everything is in God, that is, in the absolute, because the absolute is the one, the same, and the whole being. If the absolute is the one, the same, and whole being, then it follows, according to Krause, that the world, and therefore everything finite, so for Krause, the world just is the realm of the finite, is ultimately grounded ontologically and epistemologically in the absolute, and is thereby essentially similar to it. It also follows that the world, being grounded and limited by the absolute, must at the same time be a metaphysical part of the absolute, and as such a relational intrinsic determination of it. In order to be able to capture this relationship, you already see it there, between, on the one hand, the absolute as the one, the self-same and whole being, and on the other hand, the world as a finite relational intrinsic determination of the absolute, constituted and grounded by the absolute, Krause distinguishes different perspectives on the absolute and its relation to the world. So the first one is, insofar as the world is thought of as the relational intrinsic determination of the absolute is thought of as what he calls the Om essence. And he was intentionally referring here to the Sanskrit Om because he understood it as signifying the unity of unity and difference. That's why he picked Om essence to describe the absolute considered in this perspective. Second, insofar as the absolute is thought of as the one and self-same being, together with its parts and their relations, it is thought of as the or essence. So or again, because O, according to Krause, signifies just also the whole, or with this guttural or. So or essence is the thought of the one infinite and unconditioned being, together with its parts and their relations. Finally, if the absolute is thought of as a whole that has metaphysical priority over its parts, then the absolute is thought of as the or essence. So deploying the concepts of the different perspectives on the absolute, Krause can clarify the dialectical relation between the world and the absolute as follows. The fact that the world is in God means that it is what it is because it is a metaphysical part of the absolute. To quote Krause, I here use, following current usage, in of finite beings and essences, and thereby indicate that the higher whole is this finite as its part. So for God's relationship to the world, this understanding of the world's being in God, according to Krause, follows. Quote again, through this, therefore, is proven the fundamentally important distinction between the following two propositions. The world is outside of God, and the world is outside of God as the Ur-essence. So the first sentence is fundamentally false because apart from Or-essence, nothing is conceivable, and that the infinity and unconditionality of God would be denied by the slightest external appearance. But the other sentence, that the world is outside of and under God, insofar as God is the Ur-essence, so the whole which has metaphysical priority over its parts, is fundamentally right. So Krause continues, I distinguish God from the world as prior to and above and over the world, that is, as Ur-essence. God as Ur-essence, demarcated, distinguished from the world, from the whole world. Therefore, the world is thought outside of and under God as ur-essence. So in more detail, Krause has a really sophisticated system, which is really like hundreds of pages just reflecting on these points. So therefore, the old dispute, according to Krause, about the relation of God to the world, whether God is extra-worldly and the world is an extra divine being or not, is satisfactorily solved. For by distinguishing the absolute from itself as ur-essence, it is seen that God as one is the self-same whole or-essence, neither outside, nor above, nor on, nor in the world, but certainly in himself, under himself, and through himself. God is also the world. It's your turn.
Okay, so now we're coming to the commonalities here. So both non-dual Shaivism and Krause's panentheism are built on the same philosophical insight on which outside of the God absolute, so God, Shiva, or essence, nothing exists and nothing is conceivable. This insight in turn leads both of them to the philosophical need to identify finite empirical reality either as a metaphysical part of the absolute or as a manifestation or expression of the absolute itself, which manifestation, however, is not to be thought of as ontologically separated from or ontologically added to the absolute. Let us call this feature axiom 1. So all of reality is divine.
So as a consequence of their model of the absolute as all-encompassing, both non-dual Shaivism and Krause affirm a panentheistic system of philosophy, which not only holds that all finite entities are in God, but that God at the same time is both immanent in the finite world and transcends it as its ultimate ground. So that God is the world in himself as essence, and that the world is the manifestation of Shiva on the one hand, and the propositions that God as essence is beyond the world, and that Shiva is more than what he manifests as the finite world on the other, express the same philosophical insight into the structure of ultimate reality. So let us call this axiom number 2: the divine is both immanent and transcendent to finite reality.
So in light of axiom 1 and axiom 2, the perspectives of non-dual Shaivism and Krause's philosophy on how to address the different aspects of the absolute can also be mapped onto each other. So while Kashmir non-dual Shaivism holds that the difference between Shiva and Shakti is the difference between the absolute as such. So Shiva on the one hand and its creative force to manifest the universe, Shakti on the other. In Krause's panentheism, this difference is expressed as the distinction between or-essence, understood as the absolute as such, and ur-essence, seen as the causative aspect of the absolute, which metaphysically grounds the finite world. Let us call this axiom 3: the divine appears to the human mind as a vexing image.
On both non-dual Shaivism and Krause's panentheism, furthermore, the absolute is not only mere objectless consciousness, it is not nirguna Brahman, but it is the epitome of self-consciousness, saguna Brahman. In fact, it is, so the absolute, it is the one originally self-conscious being which knows itself completely, and through this self-knowledge knows every finite entity as belonging to its very own essence. Or essence, that is Shiva, knows that he is everything in and through himself. Let us call this axiom number 4: the divine is the one paradigmatic, fully self-conscious subject.
So when it comes to the existence of the world, another commonality appears. Both non-dual Shaivism and Krause assumes that the existence of finite reality is embedded in a profound metaphysical freedom and at the same time necessary in its very existence. For non-dual Shaivism, the chief characteristic of God is his freedom, his autonomy, and his independence. Consequently, the creation of the finite world is the expression of God's absolute freedom, svatantriya. However, to freely create a world belongs to Shiva's natures and finds its expression in the cyclic procedure of creating and annihilating the world. According to Krause, basically the same situation occurs. God freely creates the world because God is the only truly unconditioned being, which could not be conditioned to create the world by anything apart from his own nature. Therefore, God freely creates the world, but to create a world belongs to the divine essence itself, since finitude is a part of the essence of the absolute considered as essence. Let us call this axiom 5. The divine is the free cause of the finite world, although creating a world belongs to the essence of the divine.
Based on their shared insights concerning the metaphysical foundation of all of reality, expressed in axioms 1 to 5, it seems only natural to find further commonalities between non-dual Shaivism and Krause's panentheism concerning their respective stance on the ultimate purpose of all of creation. Non-dual Shaivism states that the ultimate purpose of creation is Grida. I hope I put okay. That is the free play of Shiva's nature. Krause, in a similar vein, argues that the purpose of creation is for God to freely realize his eternal divine essence in a temporally infinite universe. So on neither account is the purpose of creation something external to the Godhead, but rather a self-realization of the infinite divine being, which, through the creation of the finite world, mediates himself with himself as an expression of his infinite divine life. Let us call this axiom 6. The ultimate purpose of creation, or of empirical reality, if you want to avoid the term creation, is the free unfolding of the eternal divine nature in an infinite temporal universe.
Based on this stance on the ultimate purpose of all creation, non-dual Shaivism and Krause specify the particular purpose of human life as follows. In non-dual Shaivism, the finite being, that is the limited self that has forgotten its true nature as Shiva, and the purpose of spiritual practice is to recognize one's identity with God and regain knowledge of one's true self, which is why it is called a system of recognition, so pratyabhijna. The purpose of human life is to recognize oneself as God. Regarding the purpose of human beings, Krause argues that the purpose of human life is to recognize that God in himself is myself, which on Krause's panentheism entails recognizing to do the good just because it is the good. Since this is what is meant, it means to freely contribute to the realization of the eternal divine nature in a temporal universe. Let us call this axiom 7. The purpose of human life is to recognize one's divinity. Yeah, I think for to do justice to the time, we have to skip the final commonalities here, but you could see we have 6 minutes.
Yeah, but we have also the difference.
Yeah. So we have axiom 8. So the nature of the divine being is accessible in and through a special act of immediate intuition, ultimately caused by the divine being itself. And then finally, we have axiom 9. So a teacher can, or a guru can evoke the special act of immediate intuition of the divine being in fellow human beings. But let us now go to the differences.
Yeah. Is it you?
Yes,
okay.
it's you.
Okay. So based on the above analysis, it is no surprise that it is hard to find crucial differences between non-dual Shaivism and Krause's panentheism. Axioms 1 to 9 together form a single paradigm of ethico-metaphysical philosophical reflection, which conditions roughly a particular outlook on reality as a whole. So non-dual Shaivism and Krause think along the same lines. However, the devil is in the details, and there may be two differences, well, at least two differences between Krause and non-dual Shaivism, which, depending on one's own context, may turn out to be marginal or not.
So the first difference is revealed through a closer look of axiom 7. So the purpose of human life is to recognize one's divinity. For Krause, to realize one's own divinity is to realize one's own freedom, which in turn, according to Krause, entails the insight that one's freedom should be used according to the principle of morality, so Sittlichkeit, since Krause was enough of a Kantian to hold the deep conceptual relation between freedom and morality. The ultimate purpose of human life in light of their divinity, then, is for humans to act morally and to realize the good just because it is the good and for no other motivation. Consequently, because God is every finite entity in himself, the self-realization of the divine being, which is all of reality in and through himself, is the self-realization of freedom according to the principle of morality, which entails that all of reality has a teleological and normative spin to it. Therefore, Krause would add axiom 7a to accompany axiom 7 in the following vein. Axiom 7a, realizing one's divinity, entails a teleological and normative outlook on all of reality and leads to the need to live a life according to the principle of morality.
While non-dual Shaivism would agree with Krause's premise that recognizing one's divinity is synonymous with recognizing one's freedom, it departs significantly from the idea that this freedom entails adherence to a binding moral principle. The non-dual Shaiva corpus explicitly challenges dualistic ethical frameworks as exemplified in the 29th chapter of Abhinava's Tantra Loka, which prescribes transgressive rituals involving impure substances such as alcohol, and antinomian practices such as ritualized sexuality. So these acts are not endorsements of amorality, but pedagogical tools designed to dismantle rigid distinctions between purity and impurity, sacred and profane, good and evil. Through the integration of opposites, the practitioner comes to experientially realize that all phenomena, including the morally contested, are expressions of Shiva's singular non-dual consciousness. So this recognition renders conventional moral categories provisional rather than absolute and subverts the Vedic Brahmanical ethics of obligation.
Non-dual Shaiva metaphysics further complicates the notion of a universal moral principle by positing that Shiva is the sole agent, whose free and playful creativity encompasses all dualities, including those of virtue and vice. Yet to characterize this tradition as amoral would be mistaken. Scholars may have too readily dismissed it as lacking any ethical foundation. For instance, Tantra Loka, and this is in the 8th chapter, explicitly list virtues such as non-violence, truthfulness, and rectitude as essential for the unliberated individual who remains bound by karmic laws. For the aspirant, ethical discipline serves to refine one's awareness and cultivate the recognitions of one's innate divinity. Even the liberated being, so the Jivan Mukta, though no longer constrained by karma, is portrayed as embodying compassion, so karuna, truthfulness, and selfless service. However, in this case, ethical behavior arises not from duty or obligation, but as a spontaneous expression of non-dual awareness. The Jivan Mukta is an instrument of Shiva's will, free from attachments to moral categories or outcomes. Thus, while Krause's axiom 7a links divinity with a teleological and moral order, non-dual Shaivism offers a different, though not entirely opposed view. So axiom 7b, realizing one's divinity, reveals the non-dual nature of all existing, dissolving the illusion of separateness. For the unliberated, ethical conduct purifies and prepares the mind for this realization. For the liberated, morality, however, arises not as a duty, but as spontaneous outflow of awakened awareness, effortless, uncontrived, and inseparable from the play of Shiva.
We're approaching the end.
Yes.
So another critical difference between the two systems of philosophy concerns the logic of identity and the mereological interpretation of the consequences of axioms 1, 4, and 7. On the one hand, Krause was quite clear that the ego or the I is not identical to all essence, to the absolute. The ego, as any other entity apart from the absolute, is finite and conditioned and therefore cannot be God himself, who is unconditioned and infinite. Therefore, Krause's panentheism entails that God in himself is the ego, or is myself, or everything here, and that the divinity of the ego, as the one of any other finite and conditioned entity, consists in its being a metaphysical part of the one infinite and unconditioned divine being. As its metaphysical part, the ego is only relatively identical to the absolute, not absolutely identical to the absolute as such. Let us call this axiom number 10. The ego is relatively, but not absolutely identical to the absolute as such.
In stark contrast, non-dual Shaivism asserts the absolute identity of the individual, with Shiva. Liberation involves recognizing oneself not merely as like Shiva, so Shiva Tulya, but as Shiva himself in every respect, including as the efficient and material cause of the universe. Let us call this axiom 10a. So the I is absolutely identical to the absolute as such. This distinction also mirrors the historical debate within the Shaiva tradition. So the dualist Shaiva Siddhanta, akin to Krause, holds that even post-liberation, individuality persists. The goal is to become similar to Shiva, so Shiva Tulya, not identical. Non-dual Shaivism, however, rejects this compromise. The liberated soul is Shiva, leaving no ontological distinction. These divergent views directly shape axiom 7. The purpose of human life is to recognize one's divinity. For non-dualists, this recognition entails realizing one's identity as the very creator of the universe. For Krause and the dualist Shaiva Siddhanta, it means achieving divine likeness without surrendering individuality.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much.